The millionaire's children cried every night until the maid did something incredible. For 8 months, 12 nannies had left the white mansion on the hill, each saying the same words before walking away. There's something wrong with that house. They didn't leave out of fear. They left out of exhaustion. Exhausted by sleepless nights, by the endless cries of 2 8-month-old infants no one could soothe, and by the suffocating silence pressing against the luxurious walls as if it were trapping an unnamed grief inside. That night, fog rolled in from the San Francisco Bay, curling over the winding streets and wrapping the Caldwell estate in a thin, cold veil, like the city wearing mourning clothes. In the nursery upstairs, Noah and Nathan cried until their voices cracked, thin, broken sounds that rose again, echoing down the marble corridor like a plea for mercy. Downstairs, Ethan Caldwell, founder of a world-famous tech empire, wandered without aim. His tie hung loose, his collar wrinkled. His reflection in the glass, a shadow of a man who once ruled the world with data, yet couldn't quiet his own sons. He poured another drink, the only sedative still working. The glass hit the table with a hollow sound that filled the room crowded with lifeless luxury. Every cry pierced through him, reopening the wound he refused to touch. Clara, his wife, the woman who once filled this house with laughter, had died giving birth to the twins. Since that day, Ethan had not slept a full night. He feared dreams, feared the moment when their cries would pull her image back into the doorway, smiling as if she had never gone. "Stop," he whispered, not sure to whom, to the boys, or to himself. The cries answered him, louder, as if the children were saying what he could not admit. The glass tightened in his hand. Whiskey spilled, spreading like a wound that wouldn't close. He thought of the people who had left. 12 nannies, 2 doctors, 1 therapist. All had given the same reason. "We can't stay here, sir. Something is crying inside this house." Outside, the wind from the bay carried the faint sound of church bells. At the iron gate draped in fog, a woman stopped. The streetlight caught her face. Grace Miller, tired but kind, wrapped in a faded gray coat that clung to her thin frame. She had no reason to stop, but the sound coming from the house held her still. It was unlike any cry she had heard. It had a soul, like someone trapped between this world and memory. Grace gripped the handle of her small bag, lifted her gaze to the glowing window above, where 2 small shadows thrashed in despair. She exhaled softly, then smiled, the fragile smile of someone who has heard destiny whisper her name. Beneath her breath, she murmured, "Let the pain in that house be heard." Inside, Ethan froze at the stairs. The doorbell rang. No one visited the Caldwell house at this hour. Martha, the loyal housekeeper, set down her cup with trembling hands and walked to the door. When she opened it, cold air rushed in with the smell of sea salt. Standing there was Grace, damp with fog, shivering, but her eyes calm. "I'm sorry to disturb you," she said softly. "I heard the babies crying, and I thought maybe I could help." Martha studied her, uncertain whether to trust or fear. Everyone who had entered this house had failed, yet something in the young woman's voice carried peace, an odd, quiet peace amid the chaos. Before she could answer, Ethan's voice echoed from inside. "Martha, who's out there?" The older woman turned and whispered to Grace, "Wait here." The door closed, leaving the woman alone in the mist. She looked up at the window, still glowing gold, listening to the cries that rose and fell like a prayer. Deep inside, she knew she had arrived at the right place. A home where not only 2 children needed comfort, but a father's soul longed to be awakened. And on that fog-soaked night, when the air itself seemed too heavy to breathe, destiny quietly began to move. The door opened again, and Ethan Caldwell appeared in the dim glow of the hallway. The light washed over his exhausted face, dark circles hollowing his eyes after countless sleepless nights. He looked at the woman standing on the porch, damp from the fog, calm in a way that didn't belong to midnight. "Who are you?" His voice was rough, brittle as cracked paint. "Grace Miller," she answered softly, almost afraid her tone might break the air. "I heard the babies crying, so I stopped." Ethan frowned. A stranger at his door in the middle of the night because she heard crying? Absurd. And yet, for a fleeting moment, he caught her gaze. No pity, no curiosity, only an honest kind of listening. He turned to Martha. "I don't need anyone new. I need silence." Grace didn't move. She wasn't timid, but she didn't fight either. "Silence doesn't come from money, Mr. Caldwell. It comes from the soul." The words struck like a soft blade to the place he'd hidden deepest. For a heartbeat, the whole house seemed to hold its breath. Martha watched nervously, expecting the usual outburst whenever anyone brushed against the wound named Clara. But Ethan didn't lash out. He just stood there, half surprised, half unsettled, as if a memory had stirred awake. Then the crying rose again upstairs, slicing through the fragile calm. Grace tilted her head, listening, then asked quietly, "May I see them?" Ethan gripped the rim of his glass. He remembered every woman who had said those words, and everyone who'd left after a few nights. He wanted to refuse, but what came out instead was, "Go ahead, but I warn you, you won't last till morning." Grace smiled faintly. "I didn't come to last. I came to listen." She stepped inside, leaving the fog to slide off the doorstep like silk. Her footsteps on the wooden floor were soft and steady, blending with the faint sobs above. Ethan followed, glass in hand, caught somewhere between cynicism and curiosity. The hallway stretched long, patches of light and shadow pulsing on the walls like the heartbeat of the house itself. Nearing the nursery, Grace paused. The air felt different, colder, heavier, as if sorrow had taken shape. Ethan crossed his arms. "I've tried everything. Nothing works," Grace nodded gently. "Sometimes you don't need to do anything. You just have to be there." She opened the door. The two wooden cribs rocked gently with every tiny sob. Under the soft glow of the lamp, the babies' faces were flushed and glistening with tears, fists clenching at the empty air. Grace moved closer and whispered something so low that only the infants could hear. Ethan stood at the doorway, about to ask what she'd done, but suddenly the crying stopped. Not complete silence, but the soft, fragile kind that feels like the last drop of rain after a storm. No one spoke in that room, only the faint golden light breathed softly, and the wind whispered through the half-closed window. Ethan Caldwell stood frozen at the doorway, the glass in his hand forgotten. He stared at the stranger sitting beside the cribs, her dark hair falling loosely over her shoulders, her calm face glowing as if she were speaking to something unseen. Grace Miller rested her hand on the wooden rail, her fingers tracing the air as if searching for the heartbeat of the house itself. She didn't shush, didn't sway, didn't use that practiced tone people call soothing. She simply sat there, her quiet gaze on the twins who had stopped crying, her silence speaking the language they seemed to understand. "What did you do?" Ethan asked again, not angry this time, just bewildered. Grace smiled softly. "I just listened." "Listened to what?" "To their pain." He almost laughed, But the sound died before it reached his throat. In the dim light, the boys lay still, their breaths even, their faces wet but peaceful. The calm he had craved for 8 long months had finally arrived, and in a way no logic could explain. Martha stood behind him, her hand over her mouth, tears running silently down her cheeks. "Dear God," she whispered. Grace turned to her with a gentle smile. "It's not a miracle, ma'am. It's just that someone finally listened to the heart of this house." Ethan swallowed hard. Those words hurt more than they should have. No one had spoken of the heart in this home since Clara died. His world had become one of codes and numbers, meetings and silence. He didn't believe in souls or invisible things, but standing there, he could feel it. A quiet warmth spreading through the air, soft as the light filtering through the curtains. Grace tilted her head slightly. From the hallway came the faint click of the grandfather clock, then silence. "The clock stopped," she murmured. "It's old," Ethan said. "Probably broken." "No," she whispered. "Sometimes time stops to listen." He clenched his hand, ready to argue, but something in his chest tightened instead. He hadn't felt this in so long, a fragile mix of sorrow and release, the tremor of a heart remembering how to move. Grace rose, pulling the blankets up over the twins. "They'll sleep again soon, but when they wake, you need to be here." "Here? For what?" "So they'll know you didn't leave." The words hit harder than he expected. He had been here for months, but he had never truly been present. He had lived inside this house, yet avoided this room like it carried a ghost. Grace turned to him, her gaze tender, not judging. "Sometimes what children need isn't a hand, it's presence." She stepped out quietly, leaving Ethan standing between the two cribs. The golden mobile above them spun slowly, scattering circles of light across the walls. He set his drink down for the first time in months and didn't reach for it again. In that fragile light, he heard the rhythm of their breathing merge with his own. And somewhere deep inside him, a door he'd kept sealed began to open. Just enough for the first trace of warmth to find its way in. Morning entered the Caldwell house cautiously, as if even the sun feared breaking the fragile silence it had just reclaimed. The twins slept soundly, their lips curved in faint dreams. Martha stood at the doorway, hands gripping her cloth, unable to believe the calm that now filled the air. For 8 months, she had known only the sound of crying. Now, for the first time, she heard peace breathing. Ethan hadn't left the nursery. The morning light exposed the exhaustion etched deep into his face. He sat still, eyes fixed on his sons, at once foreign and familiar, like looking into the part of himself he'd abandoned long ago. When Grace entered, he looked up. Her hair was tied neatly, a cup of tea in her hand, her calm expression untouched by the strangeness of the night before. "They slept well," she said softly. "Thanks to you," he replied, his voice dry but no longer cold. Neither spoke for a moment. Then the hallway clock began to tick, a slow, deliberate rhythm like the heartbeat of something newly alive. Martha's voice trembled. "That clock, it hasn't moved in 8 months, sir." Ethan frowned and stepped into the corridor. Each tick seemed to shift the air itself. In the dim light, the framed photos shimmered faintly, and on the table beside the clock sat a small glass jar filled with dried jasmine. When he brushed his fingers over it, a faint scent rose, the scent of Clara. He recoiled instinctively, as if touching something forbidden. "Mr. Caldwell." He turned. Grace stood halfway up the stairs, the morning light haloing her hair like mist. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "That you've brought something I can't explain." "You don't have to explain," she said quietly. "Sometimes you just have to feel." After a pause, he asked, "How long do you plan to stay here?" Grace met his eyes. There was no fear there, no demand. "I didn't come to fix you," she said. "I came to walk beside you, through the part where you learn to feel again, if you'll let me." He gave a faint, skeptical laugh. "If you stay, I don't need promises. I need results." Grace's answer came gently but firm. "If I stay, results can't be bought. They have to be built." The words hung in the air, simple yet sharp. Ethan wanted to reject them out of pride, but he couldn't. Deep down, he knew there were things in his life he'd never built, only bought, controlled, avoided. He turned to Martha and muttered, "Prepare her a room." From that moment, the house began to shift. Small things at first, nothing loud, but enough to unsettle the stillness. Whenever the twins cried, the old clock stopped, its hands frozen mid-air, as if held by an unseen force. When they calmed, it resumed ticking, slow, steady, like the breath of someone returning to life. Sometimes in the afternoon, a faint perfume drifted through the air, sweet jasmine, the scent that once followed Clara everywhere. Ethan never mentioned it, but each time it came, his eyes burned. One evening, as Grace tidied the nursery, the old music box on the shelf began to play by itself, the same lullaby the twins sometimes mouthed in their sleep. No one had touched it. Grace didn't flinch. She could feel it. The sadness had form. It lived in the walls, in the cold morning air, in the hush between breaths. The twins began a strange habit. Whenever they woke, their eyes fixed on the locked door at the end of the hallway, the one Ethan never allowed anyone to open. Their gaze wasn't fearful, only steady, as if recognizing something waiting beyond. Martha whispered to Grace, her voice shaking, "That's where Mrs. Clara Caldwell died." Grace tightened her grip on the porcelain cup. Neither spoke again. But they both knew, some doors aren't locked with keys, but with grief. And until that door was opened, this house would never truly sleep. That night, the Caldwell house filled once more with crying. It wasn't ordinary crying, but a wrenching sound that seemed to pull the breath from the walls themselves. Rain lashed against the windows, and wind from the bay howled through the glass, blending with the baby's wails into one chaotic symphony. Ethan rushed down the stairs, his face pale, eyes hollow with exhaustion. His tie hung loose, his shirt wrinkled. He looked less like a man than the shadow of one beneath the dim kitchen light. Martha hurried over the stove, hands trembling so badly that half the milk spilled across the counter. Grace held Noah, rocking gently, whispering low, but nothing worked. Nathan, in Martha's arms, screamed harder, their tiny faces flushed red as if even their lungs were fighting to stay alive. "Enough!" Ethan's voice broke the air like shattering glass. The wine glass in his hand hit the table, a fragment snapping off the rim. "I've paid the best doctors in the city, hired the most recommended people, bought everything they said would help, and still they cry. 8 months of this. What good are either of you? You're both useless." Martha flinched, lips pressed tight as tears welled up and rolled down her cheeks. She had seen his anger before, but never like this. His voice cracked not with rage alone, but despair. Grace didn't answer. She only held the child closer, her calm a strange, quiet light amid the storm of noise and fury. "It's not the doctors," she said softly, "and it's not hunger. It's because no one's been listening to what they're trying to say. Ethan turned sharply toward her, eyes like shards of glass. Listening? You think they're talking? They're 8 months old, Miss Miller. Grace met his stare, unflinching, her gaze steady, not defiant, just painfully human. Crying is a language too, sir. He let out a dry, hollow laugh. I don't have time for this kind of cheap philosophy. You want to prove something? Fine. You have 1 minute. That's enough, she said simply. The kitchen sank into a heavy silence, broken only by the rain hammering the roof. Grace bent down, gently took Nathan from Martha's trembling arms, and lowered herself to the floor, right in the middle of the room. The babies screamed until their little bodies shook with exhaustion, fists curled tight around nothing. She gathered them both in her arms, their wet faces pressed to her chest, and began to breathe, slowly, deeply, steadily. 1, 2, 3, as though she were transferring her warmth into their fragile, restless hearts. Then she began to sing, not in words, but in a sound between melody and memory, soft, fractured, achingly old. Her voice was hoarse, imperfect, but honest enough to bend the air. Each note floated through the sound of the rain, wrapping around the children's ragged breaths until their cries faltered and stopped. Not from weariness, but as if something within them had finally found rest. Ethan stood frozen, breath caught in his throat. Martha brought a hand to her mouth, eyes shining. The light cast Grace's shadow against the wall, her blouse damp with the children's tears, hair loosened, her face serene as though she'd been praying. The twins slept, their breathing even, the house wrapped in the rarest silence. What did you do?" Ethan's voice was so faint he barely heard it himself. Grace looked up at him, her gaze gentle yet unyielding. "Nothing," she said. "I just let them feel safe." "That's just a trick," he said weakly. "A way to soothe them." "No," she whispered. "They're not crying for milk or for sleep. They're crying for what you're holding back." The words fell into the room like a single drop into still water, sending ripples that seemed to reach the edges of the house. Ethan didn't move. A flash of lightning cut through the window, bathing his face in a sudden white light, empty, frightened, and lost. He wanted to argue, to dismiss her, but the words refused to come. Not because he was angry, but because he was afraid she was right. Grace bent down and kissed the twins lightly on the forehead. "When grown-ups stay silent too long," she murmured, "children begin to cry for them." Outside, the rain kept falling, drumming against the roof like the slow beat of a heart awakening. Ethan stood watching, the woman on the kitchen floor, 2 sleeping children in her arms, a fragile glow in the middle of the storm, and realized that what terrified him most wasn't their crying. It was his own silence. The next afternoon, pale sunlight slanted through the dust-covered window of the small attic at the end of the hallway. Grace was cleaning the storage room, as Martha had asked, a space abandoned for years, filled with boxes, sheets, and forgotten objects. The air was thick, heavy with the weight of memory. Every step she took made the old floorboards sigh, as if the house itself were remembering. In the corner of an old cabinet behind a stack of yellowed boxes, Grace found a small leather notebook and a sealed envelope, its wax brittle with age. On the front, in soft cursive letters, was written, "Clara Caldwell." She brushed off the dust, and a chill ran down her spine, like touching something sacred that had been buried too long. She opened the notebook, turning a few pages. Slanted lines of violet ink appeared, Short notes, unfinished verses, fragments of thought addressed to her husband and children. Each word seemed to breathe with the life of a woman who once loved and hoped. On one page, only a single line was written. Love never dies. It only changes form. If you seek me, look where life still remains. Grace sat on the floor, her heartbeat slow and steady. She lifted the envelope, studying the name for a long moment. And then, without warning, the door behind her burst open with a rush of air. Ethan stood in the doorway, his face tight, eyes wild with something between fury and fear. "What are you doing here?" "I was just cleaning." "Don't touch that," he barked, his voice breaking. He strode forward, snatching the notebook and the letter from her hands, his breath uneven. "Don't touch my memories. You have no idea what they mean." His hand trembled. The envelope slipped from his grasp, fell to the floor, the wax seal cracking open. The paper unfolded, fluttering slightly in the draft. Ethan's gaze caught the handwriting, and in an instant, he knew the voice behind it. Gentle, familiar, like a whisper resurrected from the dark. "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. Don't imprison me in your guilt. See me in the eyes of our children." Time stopped. The fading sunlight touched his face, revealing the tired lines carved by grief. His lips parted, but no sound came out. A tear dropped onto the page, blurring the last words. Ethan's knees gave way. He sank to the floor, shoulders trembling, a sound escaping his chest. First a quiet sob, then another, then the kind that breaks what's been locked too long. Martha, standing by the hallway, pressed her hand to her mouth, eyes brimming. Grace said nothing. She simply placed her hand gently on his shoulder. The silence between them turned sacred. There was no need for comfort, no need for words. In that stillness, Grace understood that Ethan Caldwell was finally crying, not from loss, but from the permission to remember. Outside, the wind died down. The clouds parted, and a narrow beam of sunlight fell across the wooden floor where they sat. A man who had found his tears again, and a woman who knew that sometimes healing begins the moment someone dares to open an old letter. The last light of the afternoon slipped from the window, leaving behind a dim glow and a quiet warmth inside the small attic. Ethan still sat on the floor, his hand gripping the tear-stained letter. Clara's words echoed in his head, every line circling through the hollow in his chest. "Don't imprison me in your guilt. See me in the eyes of our children." Grace rose slowly, placed her hand once more on his shoulder, then quietly stepped away, leaving the man alone with the letter and the silence that had grown too large. When her footsteps faded into the corridor, Ethan lifted his head, looking around the dusty room where the past had just stepped out of the shadows. His eyes caught a small brass key on the floor, spilled from the split seam of a battered chest he'd dragged open. He picked it up. It was heavy and cold, as if it carried Clara's breath. Night fell gradually. Rain began to tap softly on the bay windows. Ethan walked down the dark hallway, his bare feet brushing against the cool wood. The old hallway clock remained frozen, its hands suspended between two numbers, as though waiting for him. Each step felt like a descent toward the place where his heart had been locked away. The door at the end of the hall stood there, silent, heavy, like a wound that refused to heal. He stopped, key in hand, his palm damp with sweat. "Clara," he whispered, afraid her name might awaken the wind. No one answered, only the sound of rain and his own breathing. The lock clicked softly. The door opened. A wave of scent drifted out, faint but distinct. Lilies and jasmine, Clara's scent, the fragrance that once lingered on his collar every morning she kissed him goodbye. The room was warm, yet filled with a sorrow so still it felt like time had stopped 8 months ago. On the table, everything remained in its place. A half-knitted scarf, an open book, and at the center of it all, a small wooden music box, its lid inlaid with silver. It was open, the gears turning slowly, the tune playing faintly. The same lullaby Clara used to hum to the twins before they were born. Ethan moved closer, his hand trembling as he touched it. The sound was fragile as breath, yet when his fingers rested on the lid, the melody grew stronger, clearer, as if recognizing the man it had been waiting for. He closed his eyes. Images flooded back. Clara's smile, her voice, the way she'd rest her hand on her belly and whisper, "They'll have your eyes, Ethan." A knot rose in his throat, choking him. He lifted the box, holding it close, and left the room. The wind swept down the hallway, tugging at the curtains, carrying the scent of jasmine after him, guiding him through the last of his fear. In the nursery, the twins began to stir, tiny whimpers rising between their dreams. Ethan approached their cribs, set the music box on the table, and turned the key. The melody spilled out, soft, tender, full of memory. Noah shifted slightly, a faint smile curving on his lips, while Nathan clutched the edge of his blanket as if holding onto a dream newly found. Grace appeared at the doorway, silent, watching. The dim light fell across Ethan's face, where pain had begun to make room for something new, something fragile and warm. He sat beside the cribs, his eyes glistening, his voice trembling like a confession. "I'm sorry, Clara," he whispered. "I kept the silence too long." At that moment, the old grandfather clock began to tick again, its rhythm steady and alive. Martha, standing at the door, raised a trembling hand to her lips, tears spilling down her face. "Dear God, the clock is running again," she murmured. Ethan looked at his sleeping sons, the melody still playing, the light softening the room. And for the first time in months, the Caldwell house, after all its sorrow, breathed again. That night, the Caldwell house was wrapped in silence. The rain had stopped, leaving only the soft murmur of waves against the bay and the slow ticking of the old clock. No longer a haunting sound, but a gentle rhythm of life returning. The nursery glowed with warm amber light, casting a tender shine on the twins' peaceful faces, their smiles still lingering from their dreams. Ethan sat quietly beside the crib, his hand resting on the wooden edge, while Grace sat opposite him. They didn't speak for a long time, as if the whole world had paused to listen to the house breathe. After a while, Grace spoke, her voice low but steady. "I used to think crying was the worst thing," she said, her eyes distant. "But then I realized, crying is just the body's way of reminding us that we can still feel." Ethan looked at her but said nothing. He simply listened. "When my mother died," Grace continued, "I was 12. She passed giving birth to my little brother. My father couldn't bear it. He left, said he couldn't look at us anymore. I grew up in other people's houses, places that were spotless, orderly, but so quiet they felt frozen." She smiled faintly, without bitterness. "Back then, I thought it was my fault. I thought if I'd prayed harder, cried less, maybe she would have lived. But no, pain doesn't need a reason, Ethan. It just needs to be understood." The room grew still. The lamplight flickered over her face, and Ethan saw not just a housekeeper, but a soul that had walked through grief and still chosen faith over bitterness. "I used to think," Ethan said softly after a pause. That love was a privilege, something only meant for people who had time, security, trust. He looked down at his sons and sighed. I was wrong. I had everything except love, and the very thing I avoided was the only thing that could save me. Grace smiled gently, her eyes glowing like candlelight. No, love isn't a privilege, she said slowly. It's sacred work. You have to tend it, protect it, and sometimes hurt for it. It's like caring for a garden after the storm. If you're patient, new life always returns. Ethan lowered his head, his eyes glinting with a light he hadn't felt in years, the light of understanding. Silence fell again, but it was no longer empty. It was the silence of two hearts recognizing the same truth. Some wounds don't need to be erased. They only need to be seen with love. Outside, the night breeze stirred the curtains softly. The melody from the little wooden music box continued to play, steady, tender, as if Clara herself, or perhaps God, was whispering, "Real love never dies." Time flowed like water through the steps of memory. Each passing day, the Caldwell house grew a little brighter, as if the invisible cracks in its walls were being sealed by the laughter of two small children. Ethan learned to prepare bottles, change diapers, read bedtime stories. At first he was clumsy, awkward, but soon the gestures became natural. Not duty, but quiet joy. Every morning, he sat on the living room floor, an old guitar in hand, the twins crawling around him, giggling. Grace would stand by the doorway, watching with soft eyes. She was no longer just a housekeeper. To Noah and Nathan, she was Aunt Grace, the woman whose lullabies and gentle hands made the world safe again. The house that had once been filled with silence now pulsed with life. Windows thrown open to the sea breeze, carnations blooming on the table, the old clock ticking steadily like the heartbeat of something reborn. But that night, the sky over San Francisco Bay turned dark again. Clouds gathered like stone, thunder cracked in the distance, and then the rain came. Wild, relentless. Wind howled through the iron gates, slamming loose shutters. In the nursery, Noah and Nathan suddenly began to cry, hard, sharp, terrified, unlike any other time before. Grace rushed in, gathering them in her arms, rocking, whispering, "It's all right, my loves. It's all right." But her eyes lifted toward Ethan, standing in the doorway, pale. She recognized something in that cry, something deep, strange, almost otherworldly. "Ethan," she whispered, "it's time to open that door." He shook his head, his voice breaking. "No, not tonight, I can't." Grace stepped closer, laying her hand on his arm. "No one can run forever. She doesn't want you to be afraid anymore, and neither do they." She looked down at the trembling twins in her arms. Ethan closed his eyes, took a breath, and turned away. The door at the end of the hall waited, silent, dark, heavy with time. In his hand, the brass key felt impossibly heavy. Each step toward it echoed like a heartbeat in a storm. The lock turned. The door creaked open. Wind burst through, tossing the curtains, shaking the light. The room was exactly as he'd left it. The white dress on the chair, the half-drawn curtains, the scent of lilies and jasmine filling the air. But this time, on the table, a sealed letter lay half-hidden beneath the half-knitted scarf, as if the wind had shifted the yarn just enough to show what he hadn't dared to see. Ethan moved closer, his hands trembling. Lightning flared as he opened it. Inside, only a few lines, but each one pierced through him like truth. "If the children cry without reason, don't look for a doctor. Look for yourself." He froze. The paper quivered in the draft. In that moment, He understood. The crying had never been a curse. It was a calling. Calling him back. Calling him home. Ethan fell to his knees, tears breaking free, merging with the storm outside. "Clara," he gasped, "forgive me for letting fear steal everything, you and them." Behind him, Grace knelt quietly beside him. Her voice was soft, like wind through leaves. "She's already forgiven you, Ethan. She never left. She's just been waiting for you to open your heart." The thunder faded. The baby's cries softened, then ceased. The air in the room grew warm, still, peaceful. The light steadied, glowing brighter. Ethan lifted his head, eyes swollen, and realized that Clara's scent lingered still. But now it wasn't the scent of loss. It was presence. He gathered his sons into his arms, holding them close, tears falling into their soft hair. "I'm here now," he whispered. "No one has to cry anymore." Grace watched from the doorway, smiling faintly, and her eyes shimmered, not with sadness, but with peace. She knew her time in this house was ending, not because she had to leave, but because her purpose had been fulfilled. Outside, the storm was breaking, the first light of dawn spreading across the bay. The Caldwell house, at long last, was truly at peace. The next morning, as sunlight poured through the windows, Grace packed her small bag and left a note on the kitchen table. "Thank you for letting me witness a miracle. A father learning to love, and 2 children learning to laugh. If the house ever falls silent again, just play Clara's song. Life will find its way back." Ethan found the letter while making breakfast. He read it slowly and smiled. There was no tragedy, no tears, only quiet gratitude like a prayer answered.